Welcome to Modern Education, the show that dives into all things relevant to learning. Modern Education has a guest each week for an in-depth conversation about some aspects of teaching and learning. Join the host of Modern Education, Benjamin S. Woodford, as we continue to evolve the important topics for effective learning today. We will unpack the ways community members, students, teachers, parents, and researchers approach learning in all its forms. And now, introducing the host of Modern Education, Benjamin S. Woodford.
Hello, welcome back to Modern Education. I'm the host of the show, Benjamin Woodford, and I'm here with another exciting episode and another fun guest to talk with for the next hour. So if you are on the commute home or sitting at home or streaming online, we love that you joined us and happy to have you back in the audience. You can always text in 855-723-9010 if you have thoughts or questions. I'll do my best to get to them, although I can't promise I always will. So we are in the studio today with my friend and colleague, Melissa Orta Martinez. She's a Ph.D. student in mechanical engineering at Stanford University. She was born in Mexico, where she did her undergrad studies in electronic systems engineering. After working for a year at the Heinz Nixdorf Institute, she came to Stanford and studied a master's degree in electrical engineering. Since then, she's worked at Apple for 3 years as a firmware engineer, and Melissa's currently pursuing a Ph.D. in mechanical engineering here at Stanford. Her research focuses on building low-cost haptic devices for educational applications, aiming to make education more interactive and accessible for everyone. Melissa, it is such a joy to have you in the studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's my pleasure. So, first, I just wanted to start and give the audience a little bit of an idea of who you are, where you come from. So is there a story that points to how you became interested or involved in engineering as a craft?
Sure. I actually, I think throughout my younger years, I always wanted to be a doctor. But then, I don't know, at some point I realized that I was really squirmy about blood, and I was like, yeah, I can't do that.
That's probably not going to be good as a doctor, right?
Yeah. And then I was like, well, what else should I be? And I got really interested in international relations, and so in high school I took more courses like that. Like, there was a model of the UN class and things like that. And I was really interested in that. But then I remember we had a computer science class, and at some point, the teacher told us, he challenged us to make an algorithm to solve a problem. And then he said, well, if you can solve it, this is pretty hard, then you might consider a career in engineering. And I didn't really know much about engineering. My dad is a mechanical engineer, but he mostly works as a manager of a company. He doesn't really do a lot of engineering, so I really didn't know a lot about it. And then I solved the thing, and I went to my instructor and I told him I solved it, I'm awesome. And then, but then he just looked at me and was like, I mean, yeah, but you're a girl. And so I don't know what that really meant, but that really, I feel like I was really upset. And then I started to look into engineering. And then I just decided, I'm just going to go for it, see what this thing is.
Okay, so I'm really curious about this because, first of all, that's messed up, and a teacher should never say something like that. But I have this feeling, knowing you a little bit, that maybe there was almost a spite factor involved. So hearing that may have actually pushed you farther to become an engineer?
Yeah, no, I think so. I really, up until then, I was really... I'm not going to say against engineering, but really adverse to any technology. I can remember there's a computer in my house, but mostly just my brother used it. And I remember I really loved writing essays and stories. And I remember that every time any of my teachers would be like, oh, you should type this up, I would just fight it so hard. I would be like, well, why do we have to do this? No, we shouldn't have to type it. Yeah, but just hearing a guy tell me that there was something that I couldn't do, I feel then from then on, and I actually started in computer science, but man, if you don't already know programming and you enter a computer science program, that's not good.
So that wasn't fun for you?
No, that was not fun.
The technological Luddite didn't like computer science?
Yeah, because I feel like in computer science, because almost everybody has a computer, if you enter without knowing, you're just so far behind. So I remember being in class and just classmates laughing at me when I would ask a question, and just so eventually I switched to something that wasn't such a big, like, it was electrical engineering, so most people don't
that's much easier than computer programming.
But most people don't just like sit at home and program circuits all day, right? Like they just don't have the tools, and so I feel like that was way more even, and we all came in together learning.
So you feel like this gave you a level playing field to start?
Yeah, I think so. Especially I feel like at least that was my experience, but I don't want to talk in general, but I feel like a lot of professors do really buy into the idea of like a gifted person, or if you know something, it's because you're special or something like that.
Right.
And so when you're so far behind everybody else, there were teachers who just like wouldn't even pay attention to me. They're just like, of course you're not going to be able to do this, or, something like that.
How did that feel?
I felt, coming from a background where, like, in high school, I was like, I would get straight A's, things like that.
Yeah.
And then starting college and just being so far behind everybody, and then professors, like, who I believe, like, at least female professors always treated me amazing, right? Like, yes, there were a couple, like, it's Mexico, like, I did my studies in Mexico where, like, there's a lot of machismo, and people do believe, like, the man eventually is the one who's gonna work and stuff. So you do get some bad experiences with male teachers and stuff, but in general, I was treated like, I was the gifted one or whatever. But once I entered college and I was in computer science and I didn't really know anything, like, no way. Yeah. No
so do you feel like this really was a hit to your ego?
Yeah. And I know people, like, I think it was a good hit in the end. I feel like, I do feel like calling somebody gifted or smart is really a bad thing. Like, it teaches them not to question themselves, not to really learn, not to really have doubts. Like, I feel like questioning is really good for learning. And so I feel like at that point, when I wasn't one of the, like, gifted ones anymore, and I had to really struggle, I feel like it actually really helped me learn. And I did have to switch to electrical engineering, but I think it was for the best in the end, because I feel like it gave me a more deeper understanding of computers in general and electronics and how everything works. So I think it worked out.
Yeah, I think it has worked out. Yeah. You've made it to a very high level within your work and where you're at right now. You clearly have been doing something right. Yeah, I think this is a really important point for our listeners out there to realize, if you have kids or you have students, to think about what these labels we give them do. And sometimes we think that it's only bad labels that can hurt students, right?
Yeah.
Calling a student stupid or incompetent or something like that. Sure, we all can say, yes, that's bad. But I think the flip side of that really doesn't get as much attention. And I'm really happy you're letting us talk about this a little bit and bringing this topic up specifically, because a lot of parents out there, when they have a gifted student, they feel this pressure to instill that their gift is special and makes them special. And maybe it does in some ways, right? Maybe some people truly are gifted. We've all heard stories of savants that can do amazing things at very young ages, but a lot of those people are not growing up to be highly accomplished because they sort of burn out early, leaving behind that label whenever they fail a couple times. And so it's a really important thing that you're bringing up, this idea of what identities we give students can serve to hurt or help. And it really is hard to tell. Just because a label's positive or negative doesn't necessarily mean it's good for the kid.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And that was more not for you necessarily, as much for the audience, if you're out there listening. I'm sitting here with Melissa Orta Martinez. She is a Ph.D. student in mechanical engineering here at Stanford. And we're moving on now to talk a little bit about, I want to talk about your arrival here. Okay. Now, I want to, maybe if you can go back and try to think about what you were feeling and what you were experiencing when you first sort of set foot on the shore and dove into classes, and, this huge cultural and geographic change happening all at once. Do you have a story you can tell about how you felt when you got here?
Sure. It was a little overwhelming, I would say. The way I really applied to Stanford was because I just wanted to learn more. And then, and I had never actually heard about Stanford. But it just happened that a kid growing up in my dad's block, he had gone to Stanford, and then when I was looking into applying to England, because I had been working in Germany at the time, just my dad told me to maybe look into the US too. I think he wanted me closer, which is awesome. And then and so I applied here because my dad knew about Stanford, and I was lucky to get in. And yeah, I mean, Stanford is tough.
Yeah,
it's a tough school. Yeah, yeah, and so I remember. I remember my first class, for example, was it was called Linear Dynamical Systems with Stephen Boyd, who's amazing. He's an amazing guy who's done amazing mathematical things for engineering.
I'm sure, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I remember like that was the first time I ever took a lecture, for example, like in college, where I went to college in Mexico, classes where kind of like high school classes, like you would sit down, it was a small class, like maximum 20 students or something in my college, and the professor would call on you to go to the board, and very much like high school. And here I was sitting in a huge auditorium with hundreds of people, and there's this guy out there just kind of just talking, and then and then you get homeworks that are not really, well, I mean, I was used to like the professor would like do a problem on the board, and then your homework would pretty much be that same problem with a little bit of change, and then your test would pretty much be the same thing, which is like another little more change. And no, here just these guys just kind of talking about general theory, and then you get a homework which is pretty much just mathematical proofs, which is something that I also had never seen before in my life.
You're getting better though, right? Yeah. I heard you have a really good tutor.
Yeah, so Ben has been teaching me more about proofs, which is awesome of him. And then, yeah, it was just a really hard hit, and it was, I mean, the environment also. I started, so I did my master's in the Department of Electrical Engineering here at Stanford, and I know that it has changed since then, but my understanding, the way it used to work, is that they would take in a fixed number of students into the master's program each year, and out of those, percentage of those would be allowed to take the qualifying examination for the Ph.D., and out of those, only 50% get to actually be Ph.D. students. So then the environment was really competitive, and I was used to a very, very, very not competitive environment. It was more like, yeah, everybody in class would just always help each other out. Like, I was always used to, in high school and in college, of just with my classmates always getting together to do homework, but more than just getting together to do it, just making sure that everybody was understanding the things, and that everybody would be kind of in a level playing field. Because there was really no competition. I mean, I never understood the worth of kind of being better than somebody else. It's just like, either you know the thing or you don't know the thing. And it's better if everybody knows the thing.
Right, yeah. And that's one of the big criticisms, I think, of the grading systems and the sort of ranking systems we use here in the U.S. is they are designed to create a distribution where someone is always better than someone else, right? And I think Stanford maybe makes that more clear than a lot of other colleges do, because they are ultra competitive at every level getting in. Even while you're here, there's so many levels of competition. So how did that feel to just show up here and first of all be thrown in this sea of hundreds of students and just being sort of a price tag sitting in a seat versus having this more personalized learning? Or more personal anyway.
I mean, it felt very lonely. On the one hand, I was, of course, so grateful. Like, once I was in that lecture hall, and it was very clear that there were some students who very, very clearly knew what was going on. They would ask questions. And then I was like way at the other end of the spectrum, sitting there just really not knowing what was going on or what anybody was talking about. I was just so grateful to even have the opportunity to be here on one end. On the other, I also it's just so lonely to know that you're, I don't know how to say it, but you're like the worm or something. You're the person who not only doesn't know, but also people weren't really, it was of nobody's interest that I really learned or that I really knew what was going on, but my own. And so I I picked myself up and I learned how to do my work. And at the beginning it was really hard. I remember I was taking that class, and then I heard about introductory linear algebra courses on MIT's website that are there just for free. And so I started taking those classes as well, like in my spare time, to really understand what the professor was talking about. And then
spare time?
And then I slowly like got caught up, right? And then now I'm doing great. It's fine.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was really lonely, and the culture is just very different in Mexico versus in the US. And so
yeah, and it's such an important thing to bring up about just the feeling of isolation. I mean, it's not just being in a new school and being in a new country and maybe having to deal with a new language. I mean, I'm assuming you probably took English classes long before you got here, right? But even still, you still are like full-time using this language in a place where you have no choice. So it's different still, right?
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. And so you have all these things going on, and you're also supposed to be doing classwork and producing and standing out and getting ahead and beating people in the competition. And it's like any human being put in that type of sort of disaggregated position would have it's like a whirlwind, right?
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what that must have been like for you. I mean, I can imagine maybe a little bit, because I think I've actually felt some of those similar things coming here, even though I'm not coming from another country. So I wouldn't want to say that that's completely unique just to coming from another country, as much as it is, this whole culture is different even than 10 miles away in the next town over. So,
and I'm sure a lot of students feel the same way. For me, really, I mean, I think what kept me like alive, no, not so dramatically, but
That's okay. We gotta be dramatic. We don't have any visuals here.
But what helped me, survive was, one, I was just so lucky that I remember so first I came here for visit day, not the normal visit day that the Americans get to come. Apparently, there's another visit day for international and diversity people. Right?
Okay, yeah.
So I went for that one, and they asked us to pick 2 professors that we would want to talk to. And this was really, really, really dumb of me, but I really, really did not understand why. In Mexico, professors were just teachers, and that's what I was used to having. And so I saw later that for people who wanted to do PhDs, it's really important to start meeting with professors, because then they talk about research. But I was just so scared. I was like, what am I going to talk to these really accomplished people about? So I just picked 2 professors who looked nice. One of them was a guy who his picture on the website was him feeding a llama, and his name is actually Professor Anthony Fraser Smith, and because I met him, we actually became very good friends. So that was one of the things that I think kept me here. It was just he's just amazing, and I could talk to him about my worries and anything that I was thinking, and so he really helped me out. And then
that's okay. Yeah. So you were talking with professors, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you spoke with one, was it Anthony?
Yeah, Anthony Fraser. Yeah, so he really helped me out. And the other one is that I decided that I wasn't going to compete. Once I came here, I was just I'm so grateful. I'm going to just learn as much as I can, and I'm going to return to my home country, and that's it. I'm definitely not going to do a PhD. And once I had that mindset, then everything was okay. But I feel like I would have killed myself if I tried to compete.
Sounds like you actually pulled a nice little mental trick on yourself, which was you let yourself off the hook.
Yeah.
Right? You had all these pressures and this sort of impending doom weighing down on you. And I think this is great that you brought this up, because this is a really powerful thing for students in all fields. I mean, if you're in a place where, you feel like you can't do it, and you feel like everybody expects you to be something that you don't think you are, which I think many students can identify with, having been in that situation at some point, it's a really important trick you just brought up. It's I call it compartmentalizing, right? You sort of compartmentalized these pressures that you felt on yourself and let them go and said, that's not something I'm worrying about right now, and you were able to focus on your studies, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had similar situations where it's like big life things are happening and I'm still supposed to be producing for my work and my school and whatever else is going on in life. And you just have to separate the two and kind of put it in a box and save it for later. You're like, okay, I can feel inadequate next month or next year, but this right now, I got to sit down and just do my work and I'll worry about the rest later. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's a great point. And it's such a poignant thing for people to understand is we have the choice to do that. You know, animals, they just work off of instinct. They're looking for food. Us as humans, that's one of our powerful abilities is to rationalize and to compartmentalize so that we can do what we need to do.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about cultural norms. Okay, so I know things must be wildly different in many ways, and I'm just wondering what cultural differences or norms have kind of stood out to you as being something that you didn't expect or you're not used to or still sort of just pokes at you and go, why do people do this?
Yeah, sure. So I think I mentioned these a little bit, but one of the main things for me is just the competitiveness. I just don't even get it. Like I don't understand. I feel like, I mean, as a society, you just cannot hope that you doing better is because somebody else does worse. I just don't understand that. I feel like there's enough things to work on. There's enough things to do where, like, if you want to stand out, just do your thing. Like, it's fine. But you do have to help other people. I mean, you have to. Like, you can't hope to be like the master all-knowing mathematician or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then everybody else is poor and everybody is
inferior. Exactly. Obviously, yeah.
I mean, if most people are not doing great, you're not gonna do great either. Like, eventually they're just gonna like, if you have all the food and the rest of the people don't have any of the food, they're more than you. I guarantee you they're going to come and take your food. Like, there's no way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, it's a really weird thing that's still going on in university settings because the business world all know that is not a good way to go about doing things. They're looking at people, and before they even hire them, they're looking at their collaboration skills and their ability to communicate and work together. And these are things that we know make a difference for productivity and innovation.
Yeah.
And when our school is stuck in this sort of 500-year-old model of everybody's fighting against each other, we got to fit a bell curve so that all our numbers work out the way they always have, it's not valuing learning, and we're not even really looking for learning.
Yeah.
The idea is not to see who knows the most, let's put them to the top. The idea is to say, who did the best in this class, let's put them at the top and assume that means they know the most.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, to me, it's just so ridiculous. I actually have a story, because I went to lunch yesterday with one of my best friends at Apple, right? Mm-hmm. And this guy, I mean, he's just amazing. He's of Indian descent. He was born in Tennessee and just survived being the only brown person in Tennessee for his life, right?
Yeah.
And he's such a good sense of humor about it, and he's so smart. He went to Michigan.
Sounds like my next guest.
Yeah. He went to Michigan University. He graduated from computers, and engineering. I believe it was electrical or computer science, one of those two. But
anyways, be so mad at you that you don't remember what he does.
I mean, I know he worked with me at Apple, so I know he's a firmware engineer there. He's been a firmware engineer there for 10 years, and he just applied to take convex optimization here as one of the professional development classes.
Okay.
And then he got a letter back from Stanford saying we're sorry, but your GPA is not high enough for you to be accepted into the electrical engineering department. I was just like, what? This is this was 10 years ago. The guy had one bad class.
Right.
I cannot believe. And they even wrote the computers. You may try the computer science department. They have lower standards.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
It's just Jesus Christ! What are you doing, Stanford? What are you doing?
Yeah. And it's a funny thing because Stanford, and not just Stanford. Let's not pick on the one Ivy League school. All the Ivy League schools have this very concrete, formulaic way of looking at people. And this guy may be brilliant. He may be highly accomplished in his field. And he may be perfectly capable of getting straight A's in every single class. I'm sure he probably is.
Yeah.
But this idea of, oh, well, your GPA says something meaningful about who you are and what you're capable of, and therefore you're not good enough for what we have to offer. And that is a really, I'd say, a very damaging way to think about people, because people will surprise you. Every time you sell them short, they will do something you didn't expect.
Yeah.
And every time you discount someone, like you, right? When you solved this engineering problem as a kid, and the teacher's like, but you're a girl, no one cares, right? And it's like, well, actually, I care. A lot of people care. And the point of discounting a person just because of one feature about them or one historical fact that you can point to and say, well, you messed up once 10 years ago.
Exactly.
So
That's
you're
crazy.
clearly not good enough, right?
And you don't know why. Like, that's the thing. I mean, like, I think I was lucky to be in a non-competitive environment, because there were so many times when, like, I remember one time when I was in college and, like, my grandma got sick, and so I just didn't show up for the test that day, right? And the professor was like, at that point in time, he was because education was way more personal, he was understanding, and he just let me take it another day or something. But I can't even imagine, like, if you're here and they just don't let you, and then you have a C forever because your grandma got sick, like, that's crazy.
Yeah, and that's it's not realistic for life. You know, I mean, I have a sort of similar but maybe more extreme example. When I was in college, in junior college, I had one semester where my doctors had prescribed me some new medication that they thought was going to help me. And I took it for a semester, and it literally made me dumb. I mean, no one told me that the side effects were that it was going to make it impossible for me to think. Like, I had clouds floating in my brain. But, you know, my professors at the time, myself, my parents, everyone's like, what's wrong? You know, like, you're a straight A student. What is happening? I'm like, I don't know. And then I realized, oh, I read the side effects of this medication. And I go, oh, okay. So life happens, right?
Yeah.
But now I have a C on my transcripts for the rest of my life.
Exactly.
And it's like, this is not reflective of my capacity. This is not reflective of who I am as a student or a person. But you can't escape that, and it's set up that way, right? It's like no excuses, no forgiveness.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I don't even understand what there is to forgive. Like, I completely understand that we do need to live with a system that encourages you to learn, but that's it. It should encourage you to learn, to be a better person, to be a better citizen, like to come up with things, right? To make society better. But it should not encourage you to just, like, get a straight A no matter what. Like, no matter what happens, no matter, like, if your dog dies or something, you have to get a straight A. No. You have to learn the thing, and you should be able to take your time or whatever you need.
Yeah. And it's not realistic for life, you know? I mean, things happen. We have troubles. We have things that pull us in different directions, family emergencies. I mean, last year, my hometown was burning to the ground, and I'm sitting in class trying to just maintain and get good grades. And, you know, I still kind of pulled it off, I guess. But the reality is, like, I would have rather taken a couple weeks off and go home and help people or do whatever I could to be involved. But it's just not realistic. Nobody cares. Nobody's like, oh, yeah, your family and friends and your hometown is more important than this quarter of classes, right? And there's just no room for that in the American society. And I think at some level that is speaking to the ideal of, if you can afford to have someone else take care of your problems for you, then you shouldn't need to take time off. And so it's, again, privileging people who can afford to be able to maintain through these types of struggles with extra help, hiring a maid, you know, getting a tutor, whatever it is they need to keep up. Some people can do that, and that system is set up to privilege people who have that kind of access. So if we're parents and we are listening in at home and we want to be mindful of where our students are at and how much trouble their lives, and, you know, having been a high school teacher, I can tell you, young people have real problems, and just because they're in high school and they don't have serious responsibilities to pay the house rent or whatever, doesn't mean they don't have real problems that need real understanding. And I think it's really important for parents and teachers to be aware that children are real people too, with real problems that need a little accommodation once in a while. And it doesn't hurt anyone to do that.
It does not.
It doesn't hurt anyone. There's literally no reason to make it that way. Okay, so we're going to move on a little here. If you're just joining us, this is the Modern Education Radio Hour. I'm sitting down with Melissa Orta Martinez, and she is in the studio telling us a little bit about her experiences as an engineer and an international student. And the next question I wanted to ask you is just, is there a situation or maybe a regular occurrence that comes to mind that to you is representative of the sort of U.S.-centric thinking or the American-centered way of seeing the world? Is there something that comes to mind that sort of epitomizes that for you? Or let me put this another way. Is there something or qualities that you've noticed since you've been here that are just really focused on America-only thinking? Like America first. Let's talk. Let's think about, like, I could put this in context, right? This guy who's playing president right now, he's proposed a wall, right? And Mexico's going to pay for this wall, apparently. Do you think that represents maybe the kind of the attitude of America to the rest of the world, or do you have any view of that type of thinking coming from outside?
It's tough. I would say I do have to point out before I start speaking that as an engineer, I am pretty sheltered, and especially living in Silicon Valley from most of these experiences. So I can't even imagine what people in the rest of the U.S. must be feeling, like international people in general.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you hear stories, but of course I cannot corroborate that those are true. I do believe, and this sounds cheesy, but I do believe that with great power does come great responsibility. So I do think that the United States, as one of the world powers, does have a responsibility to give back a little bit. Yeah, and it does hurt a lot when you see that that now they have a populist president in power who's just turning completely the other way. And that does hurt because, I mean, especially like with Mexico and the drug wars has hit us a ton. I mean, it's hit you guys too.
Yeah,
like,
well, not me personally, but yes.
Definitely. And in Mexico, there is the feeling that the only reason we're fighting it is to make America happy, because America is our number one trade partner. Like, Mexico's number one source of income are Mexicans who live here in the U.S. and send money back to their families.
Right.
Like that is just a fact.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that now we're in a war we just can't win. The drug dealers have way more money than the government does. And now the stories are just terrifying. Like you feel it every day. Like when I'm at home, the phone just rings almost nonstop, and every time you pick up, it's horrible. It's just another guy trying to extort money, saying like, "Oh, like we have your brother, and we're gonna cut off his ear," or it's a kid crying, and those are fake. They're fake, but that's all things that the drug dealers sponsor. Like that's all that mafia. That's what they do. They do a lot of people trafficking, which is also horrifying. Those stories are just terrifying. And that's all money, all sponsored by drugs. And so, I mean, Mexico, it's really sad to say, but like we have to legalize drugs or get a lot more support from intelligence agencies to fight this war in an intelligent way.
Right.
And now having a president that just turns its back on all of that is just, I don't know where it's going to end. And to be honest, I'm a little terrified because Mexico now also has elected a very, very populist president who's also basically saying like, screw the U.S. and so I don't really know where it's going to end. I think that the U.S., Mexico, Canada, like Guatemala, Belize, everybody in America should be working together. I don't believe that it's realistic to just close off your borders and say screw the rest of the world, because again, like we need each other. None of us would be breathing if, for example, if this ocean runs out of algae, none of us have oxygen. If Brazil's forests, like if all the Amazon gets burned, none of us have oxygen. So we just all have to take care of each other.
Right.
And so I don't believe that you can just focus on yourself.
Right, absolutely. I'm thinking of, if we were a neighborhood and the U.S. was the house in the middle, and Canada was the house next door, and Mexico was the house next door on the other side. It's like everyone would want to go to the Canada party, and no one would want to come to the U.S. party. And the Mexico party, I don't know, but it might be nice if we were helping each other as neighbors, like, hey, let me take your trash out for you. I know you're not feeling well, or whatever. And, if you put it in that context, we're really being very bad neighbors.
Yeah.
And neighbors need to find a way to get along, because you fight this week and next week you still have to live next door to each other.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult thing, right? I mean, you want to make peace with your neighbors, and you want to give back, like you said. I mean, a world superpower or anyone with slightly more privilege than their neighbors should help just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
A couple presents at Christmas or an extra Christmas tree doesn't kill anybody, and it makes a difference, and sort of extends that olive branch to let it be known that we're in this together.
Yeah.
And as you said, I mean, the world is a closed system with fixed amount of resources.
Yeah.
So any of this sort of U.S.-centric or, country-specific policy that doesn't look at the big picture is always missing out. Just like one individual student getting ahead doesn't make a difference in the world scheme, but a group of students or a school geared towards making sure everybody's doing well within that program or that school is wildly more successful.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you're bringing out such a great parallel between the macro and the micro, and how these things end up kind of being the same. So I might have connected it for you, but it was all there.
Yeah,
so,
you got it, babe.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit. If you're just joining us, I'm sitting here with Melissa Orta Martinez. She's a Ph.D. student here at Stanford University, and you're here with the Modern Education Radio Hour. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about being just so far away from home, right? I mean, your family, your friends, the places you grew up and sort of know. And anybody who's ever moved away from their hometown has probably been through a little bit of what you're feeling or have felt. But if you could just explain for us what it's like being so disconnected from your heritage.
Sure. I mean, it's tough and lonely, and I think maybe in Mexican culture, for example, I'm just gonna give a couple examples. Like my grandma has 8 kids. My uncles, they're all awesome, and we see each other at least 4 times a week. Like my grandma, even though right now my grandma and my grandpa, they live by themselves, their house is always full. Like there's always a place to crash, there's always food. Like my grandma, she never just cooks any meal just for herself, even though in theory she should be the only one eating. Like people just show up. Like my uncle's friends from high school show up. Like she used to live pretty close to where I went to university, so I would show up like 3-4 times a week. Then I would also, like, one of my uncles has two of my little cousins are pretty young, so I would go twice a week to teach them like music, violin, tutor them, everything. So it just like the family we were just always together. We were having meals together, everything together. And then coming here, just being so far away from that, and just not being able to like be there for your family. So many things have happened to my family, and here just people kind of don't really understand. Like I remember one time I was in the middle of, like, I had to deliver a paper and I just couldn't concentrate. Well, like, I mean, the police had kind of kidnapped my grandpa at the time, so like I could not concentrate.
Right, understandably.
But you still have to kind of just pull through, right? So what happened was, like, these robbers went into one of like my grandpa's warehouse, and then the neighbors called the police. But then the police in Mexico just are amazing, right? They never help out. They just so then the police said, "Oh, we couldn't catch them, and we couldn't get any of your stuff back." When my grandpa showed up, and he's like, "But we're still gonna need X amount of money, right? So you're gonna stay here with us, and there's big people with guns and everything, and you can call your family members to like bring money." And stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And so And so like my uncles and my dad and just people had to scramble together to get this money and get him out of there. Just like, yeah. So not only was he robbed, but also then extortion afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So like that was going on. And then, but also like you have to deliver a paper, right? So it's like, that kind of thing where it's like in Mexico, you just would go out and help your family. You wouldn't, you wouldn't worry about the silly paper.
Right.
And so that's really tough. That's really tough.
Absolutely.
Just being so disconnected. And yeah, and
there's no replacing that. I mean, besides just that traumatic a moment in your family's life at that time.
Yeah.
But even just the day to day. I mean, having that familiar place to go get some food at your grandma's house, and always knowing there's going to be family stopping by. I mean, that's something that is easy to take for granted while you're home and just be like, oh, this is so annoying. There's always people everywhere. But when you go away and you live somewhere else, it's home, right?
Yeah.
And you can't replace it. You can try to, you can make new friends and try to create a new network where you are, but there's something physically missing in your life when that happens. And maybe, it's justified for the day-to-day because you have to go to school and you're doing things to improve your future and probably improve your family's future.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that there's no understanding or leeway or even acknowledgement. I mean, how would it have meant something to you if one of your professors said, hey, take an extra week on this paper. I know there's something going on with your family, and I think you should take some time to think about that before you worry about your class. Would that have mattered to you?
Yeah, it would have mattered a lot. Just being able to go home more often. And I'm in a privileged position in the sense that so when you're Mexican and you get a visa to the U.S. and as a student, you get it for 4 years. So which means that I can travel back and forth as much as I want in those 4 years. It's still depending on like my advisor giving me vacation and all that stuff, right?
Right.
But I can't even imagine, like, I know some students like for example, if you come from Iran now, you come and like you have to stay. I don't think they get to go home almost at all. I can't even imagine what that's like for them.
Right.
So it must be like way tougher than for me. But yeah, it's just the fact that because the culture is just so different. Just I feel like a lot of people here just do not understand the fact that like sometimes you just have to be there for your family, and it would be really great to be able to go back and see them and then make up the work later. Or for me here, I mean, to be honest, like, yes, I have some friends, and I've been here a while, so now I do have closer friends, but most of the people I care about are just not here. And so it would be great if I could work, like, I don't know, if I could work, like, maybe, like, a weekend, and then later take, like, 4 days, and so I could go home more frequently. Like, right now I go home about, like, once, twice a year.
Right.
But that means that I'm pretty much out of the life of most of my family members.
Yeah, you're completely disconnected from everything, and you're just sort of at that point you're someone I used to know just showed up for a holiday, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being part of your family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something you can't put a price tag on. It's something you can't quantify with, but I earned 10 credits in school this year.
I know.
So it's a tough thing. Now, I did want to talk, and we're getting close to out of time. It goes by fast, doesn't it? I wanted us to talk about the visa process. You had a great story about going into the visa office. Fill me in here. What is that process? What does it look like?
Maybe just for people because they don't really understand.
Yeah.
And again, I'm in a super privileged position because when I went to get a visa, having been accepted to Stanford University. So imagine how much easier it was for me than for a normal person who's trying to get work or trying to get like refugee status or something like that to come here, right? But basically the way it works is like first you apply to a university, you get something back once you get accepted called an I-20. And the I-20 is a form that tells you you're allowed to be in the U.S. to study. However, that's kind of disconnected from what allows you to enter the country. And so to enter the country, you have to go and get a visa. That's what allows you to come back and forth or just enter once. Some people just get it to enter once, and then if they want to enter again, which means that if they travel home, they have to apply for it again. No matter if they have permission to stay, the permission to stay is different than the permission to come in, which is
so there's multiple bureaucratic levels here, regardless of your reasoning.
Yeah. And in Mexico, there's one embassy in Mexico City, which serves millions of people. And so you start getting in line to this humongous warehouse at around, a little before 7. So you start maybe lining up around like 6:50 or something.
In the morning.
Yeah, so you just line up. On the day that you're told that
it's
you're
like
supposed to go.
It's like when the new iPhone comes out,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. So you line up and then you start entering. They check for guns and all that stuff. You can't bring in any cell phone, no electronic devices, nothing. Like the most you can bring is like a piece of paper and a pencil and all your.
And this isn't at the airport when you're leaving, right? This is just a building you're going into.
It's a building in the center of Mexico City, a humongous warehouse. And then once you enter, then you go through different stages. At one stage, they like take your pictures and they interview you a little bit. And then there's another stage in which they interview you a little more. And then if you manage to go through all those stages, then you go into just sitting down, waiting for a consul to be available to speak to you. Now, because they service so many people, the consuls, quote, quote, is just at the end of the building. There's a row with, I would say, about maybe 30 windows, and there's just like 30 consuls just standing there, and you go up to a window when it's your turn and talk to one of them, and then they just get to decide whether you get a visa or not get a visa. And it's horrifying because everybody's hearing what everybody else what is happening to everybody else. So you're saying
this isn't a very dignifying experience?
No, it's not. Because basically you're just in front of a person who's in that moment, in that instant, deciding whether you're worthy enough to get to the U.S. or not.
Wow.
And and I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I have terrifying stories. I remember one time there was this mom who was just bawling her eyes out, and she had her kid who was in a wheelchair, and her kid looked clearly like disabled in some way. I don't know which way. And she was
we can't usually tell someone's disability just by looking at them.
Exactly. And she was just like, please, I just need to go to the U.S. to buy this medicine to get my son treatment. And the decision of the guy was, nope, you can't go.
Yeah, and do you have like a feeling of why?
No, I have no idea, because I was also in the middle of my own interview. I just I kept glancing over, and you can hear kind of what's happening, and I was just like, oh my god, like I can't believe this is going on right now.
Right.
I mean, this poor woman, and she was just bawling. I don't even know what to do to help her out. Like I have no idea.
But you're a human being, so you definitely have to feel the sadness of watching that happen, right? And the sort of demoralizing public aspect of it. I mean, you're sitting there literally begging for medicine for your kid in front of all these other people that some come in with way more privilege and access, and others are just trying to do an honest move or whatever it is they need. And it sounds like they sort of line everybody up and just sort of pick and choose with maybe some arbitrary criteria, or it's hard to say, right? I
don't know. Yeah.
Did you get, or have you heard anything about there being bribery or other sort of?
No, I wouldn't think there would be. Okay. Honestly, I mean, they seem very straight. Like, I mean, they're very tough.
So, I mean, but a minute ago we were just talking about cops holding people for ransom.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, but it's different. Like, the consuls are American citizens. They come from the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in Mexico, definitely the whole service industry is broken. Like, policemen, just any agency you can think of. It's a very corrupt government, which is really sad.
Right, right. Okay, so it is actually run by the American government?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say that their incentives are the greatest, but I would not think that anybody would be brave there. I wouldn't try it.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Now, is there something you wish, if you were to leave like a closing thought, is there something you wish people knew or did to be more sensitive to our differences, maybe culturally or for international students, or just something you wish people knew so that they could be more thoughtful?
I would say, being international here is hard. And so, but I'm thinking maybe somebody would say, like, well, why did you come here? And the reason, I mean, you do have to understand, or I mean, you don't have to, but it would be nice if you understood that sometimes there's just no other choice. I mean, the education here is the best, so you are always going to get people trying to come, and I believe that it's an important service to society to allow people to come and to give them the opportunity and to also help them out, because then what we do in return is we go back to our countries and we help them out, which in turn helps everybody. So I think it's important, but it's also important to understand that things are just a little bit harder for us. We're going to have a little bit more trouble with things. We're not going to understand the system, and just to be a little kinder and more patient and just a little bit more helpful would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an easy thing to do if we're trying, right? Was there ever anyone who like took you under their wing and helped you?
So many people. Oh my God. No, I've been so lucky. There's no way I would be here without people helping me out. I mean, you're teaching me math, which is amazing.
Yeah, but it's so much fun.
My friend Tony, of course, who's a professor here, right? He's always helpful and helps me understand. Like, I would have never tried to get a PhD if I hadn't talked to him about it, and he had convinced me that it's a doable thing. It's not something that just like people who are aliens do. Everybody can do it. So yeah, and so many friends. Like, even though the EE department was very cutthroat, I was still able to meet amazing people. I have 4 friends in particular, like Baron Mystery, Kristen Lurie, John Peterson, and Jeff Mounzer, who I met, and even though they had no trouble getting through their classes, they still took the time to explain things to me. And I mean, there's just so many people. And right now I have other friends like Alex Haas, who he actually designs ultrasonic airplanes for a living, but still he always finds time to talk to me about dynamics, for example. I don't know. I mean, of course, there's always amazing people around.
But it's such an important piece of it, right? When people make that effort to understand where you're coming from and to make that little extra step to help you get where you need to be, or just show you that you matter or that they care, it makes a big difference, especially when your family and all your cousins and friends and everyone you grew up with is so far away. It's like, without those lifelines, it can feel so isolating and so like you're doing it all alone, and no one should have to go through that. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so
Thanks
much
for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all your stories and your insights. This has been a really fun conversation.
Thank you.
I was just speaking with Melissa Orta Martinez. She's a PhD student here at Stanford in mechanical engineering, and she had a lot of great stuff to say. If you missed the talk, you will eventually be able to catch it on our YouTube archives later on. And I am Ben Woodford, signing off for one more episode of Modern Education here on 90.1 KZSU Stanford.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. To revisit the content from today's show or hear previous episodes, you can find us on YouTube and Facebook by searching for Modern Education. Make sure to come back next week as we continue the conversation and visit new topics connected to learning in all its modern form. The show is written, produced, and hosted by Benjamin S. Woodford. I'm the announcer, Darlene Franklin, and this has been a production of 90.1 KZSU Stanford. See you next week for more Modern Education.